Today we're talking with General Manager of Marketing and Corporate Strategy at Aussie Broadband. His name is Kusi, which is actually part of his last name. It's Matthew. Could you help me say it?
Yeah, Matthew Kusi-Appauh. Yep.
Kusi-Appauh, right?
Yep.
And he's led the marketing team at Aussie Broadband for the last 4 years and has taken it from 25 mil to more than $100 million in annual revenue. That was last year. They're now the 5th largest NBN provider in the country. So I'm excited to have him on the podcast. And I thought a good place to start is how you're tracking like this year. Because I know last year you were at about 100 million revenue, which was like, you doubled from 25 to 50 and then from 50 to 100. And that was a stretch goal. And how are you going this year?
So for the financial year that we've just wrapped up, we're on track, and obviously the numbers are yet to come in and be finalised. We're on track for in the area of 190 million for the financial year, which will put nearly our 3rd year of doubling the size of the company in revenue terms.
So you've doubled 3 years in a row, 4 years in a row.
Yeah.
25, 50, 100. 190. Yeah. Sorry, like I just had to count on my fingers. Sorry, that makes me look really, really smart, Mark, right now. But you doubled, 4 years in a row. Yeah.
Yeah. So yep, pretty much.
What's that like? I mean, talk to me about like the first parts of the growth. So the first years, right? Because we'll come to this last part, but talk to me about the challenge of actually having to double the revenue of a company every year for 4 years. What's that like?
So it's been a very interesting journey, and I think that anyone who's operating in a, what I would call a small business, as Aussie was, certainly when I started, we had about 60, 65 staff, so it wasn't a large operation by any means. It was a very, very interesting journey, and one that I look at, and I think a lot of businesses have kind of probably come through. They've all had similar challenges, similar struggles along the way. When we were starting out, we had a really kind of, had a real core group of people who were really invested in, having a great performing network, great customer service. Certainly those early days though, the biggest thing was how do we get our marketing out there? You're competing against giants in the industry, and particularly for Aussie Broadband in the telco industry. We're competing against NBN with the NBN product. We're competing with Telstra, with Optus, with TPG, who also have a couple of the other brands like Ironet and things like that. So you're competing against these massive companies. The 4 biggest companies in the industry have over 90% of NBN connections. So as a small regional player that we were at that time, we kind of had a really good product that we thought and great Australian based customer service. But the challenge was just getting our name out there, people who had never heard of us before. And we really started to actually quite critically look at, okay, right, well, what is the right marketing channels that are going to allow us to scale, I suppose. And what we found is that as the NBN started to roll out, people had 18 months to change. And so the NBN first came to an area, and that caused everyone in the area to stop and go, hang on a second, I've got to make a decision. Do I stay with my current provider? Do I move? Do I whatever else like that? And so we actually started, funnily enough, as a tech company, the origins of our marketing strategy were direct mail, because it allowed us to get our name out there to the customers, right when they were kind of starting to make that purchase decision. And that was kind of really what started to kick things off for us.
So you started off with the direct mail, but then how did you figure out the strategy for direct mail? Because obviously there's so many parts to getting it right, and you obviously have gotten it right to be able to get past that like initial first step.
For sure. So one of the things that we were really kind of, and I'll tell anyone who listens, I'm not a real marketer. I actually, studied international business and economics at university. And so from the get-go, it was very much a focus on testing and on getting data. So we would send out a piece of mail, and it might have been green, or it might have been blue or orange or whatever else like that, and then test it. How many calls did we receive from that mail? Okay, right. Well then, this one works better than this particular piece. Okay, right. So we iterate it, and we send out another batch of mail, and we'd send it to different areas and also at different points in time in the journey. So, we'd send mail before they went live and then test that. And then when they went live on the NBN and then test that. And then after they went live, and at each point, every kind of different tactic or different execution that we use, we test it, we collect the data on how many leads did we generate, how many sales did we generate. Okay, right, then let's make some improvements or some changes to the copy or the color or the timing or whatever, send it out again. And so it was just an iterative process. And so certainly those early years were it was a kind of really slow start for the marketing strategy. And the first year that I was with the company, we went from, when I started, 20 million. And the first year we went from 20 to 25. So, obviously an increase, but nowhere near as significant as kind of what we found obviously later on, because it took time to grow and test and whatever. And as a small business, you don't have the money to do everything all at once. You've got to start small and then build. And so that's kind of what we did. We started small, we started to build, started to add other channels, and again, with the same approach of testing and optimizing our kind of executions. And that ultimately led to, helping us jump from 25 to the 50 and then 50 to the 100. And from there has been that kind of continued focus on testing and optimization.
So then in those early days, you tested the mailers. And so how did you test them exactly? But was there a phone number that was different, or what was the difference between the mailers, and how did you test them?
It's very much art, not science, I suppose. So in the case of, for us, for direct mail, we actually looked at the address. So we would go, right, we've mailed this particular area, this locality, or this postcode. And then because the NBN is primarily an address-driven product, you order it at your house, we could then match those addresses back to the mail that we sent to those areas. And that's how we started to attribute and work out the success of different pieces, was going, right, that address is signed up. And at the time, we were basically focused on, historically, we'd done regional Victoria, a little bit of regional South Australia. All of a sudden we were getting calls from Queensland, like Butterham and places like that we, had never marketed to, that, we had no brand presence in. So early on, it was an indication of, hang on a second, this mail's starting to have an effect. And then obviously looking at the data and matching the addresses back to the localities that we mailed, we saw, this is actually being a successful strategy.
And so with NBN specifically, you chose the direct mail path because you had the addresses of where it was connected. Is that right?
Yeah. And we're very, I guess everyone's got to you got to play to the industry, I suppose, that you're operating in. So this kind of strategy wouldn't work for a lot of industries where that, they don't necessarily know where the customers are, but, because it's an address-based product, and the NBN was rolling out. So we had data on the NBNs going live in this particular area, this particular postcode. And that allowed us to then send mail. And the thing about mail was it scales at a flat cost. So the cost of sending a piece of mail to an address doesn't change like say, for example, a digital channel, where the more you bid, that price goes up and up and up per bid. Whereas you can send as many letters out as you like, and that cost is actually the same. So it allowed us to scale, quite quickly.
And how many, like at the peak of the mailing, this is just something I'm interested in, how much kind of per week was being sent, or per month was being sent in direct mail?
At its peak, which has only been certainly over the last couple of months, we've actually ramped up direct mail even further than what we started with in those early days, because we kind of started around 100,000 a week, and at its peak we were probably running at 500,000 a week.
500,000 mailers a week. Okay, so you guys know something about direct mail now.
Yeah.
And that's great. That's a lot of production stuff. And that's a lot of testing. I mean, how has the tracking now changed? Because obviously at that level of sending, is it as easy now to see the performance as it was at the start? Is it still the same strategy? or has that
It's
changed?
it's not necessarily the same strategy. What we find is that as we've started to layer obviously additional channels on top, it does become a little bit more difficult. And obviously for any marketer, I suppose the challenge is always, okay, they saw a piece of mail, but then they clicked on a digital ad, and then, how do you kind of attribute, the different channels, the mix of different channels. So it has definitely become a lot trickier the more channels that we've been operating in. But we still try and as best as we can go, right, what was the first place that person heard about us? So, if they clicked on an ad, but they received a postcard, or a piece of mail, a couple of days beforehand, we normally actually go back to that piece of mail and weight that more heavily, knowing that it's likely they're more likely to have clicked on the ad or Googled us or whatever else like that after having received, say, for example, the piece of mail in their letterbox.
Yeah, got it. So in the beginning, you started off with just direct mail. How has the marketing evolved from $20 million company just doing 100,000 pieces a week, of direct mail, to now $190 million company and the fifth largest MBN provider in the country? Like how has the marketing changed in that time?
I think it's probably been a case of we've started to then supplement, I guess, our direct mail strategy, and it was more. We've always had kind of other channels that we probably use in kind of piecemeal, bits and pieces. As we were a small business at the time, we didn't have a national strategy, so the direct mail was the start of that strategy. We supplemented that quite early on with digital advertising, and digital, obviously, it is a channel that's extremely effective, particularly where you've got a particular demographic that you're trying to target. You can target things far more easily than you can just, a direct mail. You're sending it to a household, but you don't know anything about that household. Whereas on digital advertising, Facebook, Google, you can go, yeah, they're searching for the NBN, and so that was a very logical kind of thing to pair with our direct mail strategy to make sure that, okay, cool, we've generated that interest in, hey, look, I need to look for an NBN provider, right? Make sure that we're there when they search for the NBN, they're there when they look up best NBN deals. So, quite early on, we've been using digital, and it continues to kind of be a mainstay of our marketing campaign. One of the things that as we started to grow and expand, we were never really in a position to do large scale broadcast above the line kind of advertising. About beginning of 2019, we first started our first TV ads that were just running in Metro Victoria and Metro New South Wales. And we actually found pretty much straight away running those TV ads combined with the mail and the digital advertising that we were doing, straight away having that top of funnel channel helped to lift our overall awareness. And pretty much immediately we started to lift our sales and our leads as a result.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And I've seen kind of how you guys have expanded over the years, and you're just kind of adding channel upon channel upon channel upon channel. But I also know the attribution side of thing, which is what, like you mentioned just a second ago, is really hard, right? Like how do you attribute? Because you need to do more. You need to get more market share, but you don't want to overspend and you don't want to overcapitalize on acquisition. So how do you approach it?
Yeah, so for us, what's been really important is, as I said, that kind of constant process of testing and optimization. We actually use quite heavily what we call the cost per sale, and again, it's more art than science, but as best as we can, we try to work out where did that lead first come from, if we can, and then we go, right, well, this is how much we spent on any given channel, whether it's mail or whether it's broadcast or whether it's digital. This is how much we spent. This is how many leads that we believe first came from that channel, and then how many sales resulted from those leads. And that's basically helped kind of allow us, it's not perfect, but it allows us to measure the relative performance of the different channels. And so depending on the size of budget that we have, which in the early days was obviously a lot less, we could kind of leverage our most efficient channels in order to, in terms of generating leads, and put more money into those channels. And then as we kind of found that, hey, this channel's reached, kind of a natural, saturation point. We can't, you can only scale, Google search so much before it becomes kind of unrealistic. Well, then we would move into the next tier and then go, right, okay, that next platform, whatever it was, or that next execution piece of mail, whatever it is. Okay, great. Now let's tip some money into there. So it's been a process. It is just trial and error and experimentation, and then starting to go, right, well, we run a small trial or something. Okay, right, we think that the cost per sale is roughly this. How does that perform relative to our other channels? Okay, that's good. Great. Let's scale up spend in those areas, or other areas where we go, what, this is quite a high cost per scale. Let's actually scale down spend in that area. And again, we're constantly moving money to try and to generate the most efficient results possible.
So you, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you approach campaigns by suburbs or by postcodes? Is that how you figure out your cost per sale kind of averages?
No, it's
be averages,
it's just
right?
by channel. Yeah,
by
it is.
Channel.
It is average. Yeah, but it's by channel. So we try and look at what can we determine is the most likely place that lead generated. So as an example, like I was saying before, somebody gets a piece of mail, and then a week later they Google us, they click a Google ad, they come to our website. So we would look at that and we go, right, well, we know that we sent them a piece of mail, and then they created then they searched us on Google, created a lead via Google. But we would actually attribute that lead back to that piece of mail. So then we'd go, right, well, how much do we spend on mail, say, for example, in the month of June? Okay, this is how many leads we think we generated. This is how many sales. But if somebody clicked on a Google ad without that piece of mail being there, then we would say, well, obviously in the absence of any other information, we believe that that's actually come from Google. And so that's how we go, okay, right, well, how much should we spend on Google in that month? How many leads do we generate? How many sales? That's the cost per sale for, say, for example, for Google.
And do you weigh the contributing channels at all? Or is it just first channel that you guys look at?
We just go first channel. And the reason being, obviously, this is a very, very broad kind of field, and everyone's kind of got different ways. For us, in our circumstance as a challenger brand, so we were coming from a position where when we started, we were basically unheard of in the market. So for us, our biggest kind of challenge was, how do we actually get our name out there and get ourselves, get our brand out there to people who've never heard about Aussie Broadband before. So once they had heard about us, that was actually less important, the kind of specific sequence. Whereas, if we were Telstra, everybody knows Telstra, and therefore it's really important to them, what was that last thing that generated that action to sign up with Telstra, given that everybody knows about Telstra. But given that nobody knew about Aussie Broadband when we started, we always went, right, well, what can we determine was the very first thing that person interacted with, or saw about us or heard about us. But obviously, that's starting to change over time, and it's something that we're constantly, looking at and reevaluating. Is that the most efficient way of optimizing our spend, I suppose? And
I guess, if we look at the above the line, if you're doing above the line and at the same time that you're doing the direct mail, what do you do with that?
Above the line, this is the thing. Above the line is where things started to really kind of become really challenging to measure this attribution, and it's something that I've, myself and the team, we've really struggled with. So what we've looked at for above the line, and particularly the first kind of real above the line stuff that we did was broadcast TVC ads. Now, the kind of saving grace, I suppose, and we've got a partner that we work with in this space, and their kind of advice was a 5-minute attribution window is generally what you would consider to have come from TVC. So that's kind of what we built into our model to say, right, if they were in an area where, say, for example, Vic Metro is an area, or Vic Regional is another area. Mm-hmm. So if they were in an area and they created a lead within 5 minutes of seeing a TV ad in that area, then we would attribute that lead to TVC. Now, it's a flawed methodology right from the start. You know what I mean? Because just because a TV ad played in an area doesn't necessarily mean that that the person necessarily was watching that, or necessarily meant that they did anything. And because it's a TV ad has played, obviously that increases awareness, and that means somebody, you know, not necessarily within 5 minutes, but in the next day or the next week or the next month, they may sign up from that TV ad, even though they haven't necessarily just seen it. It's when they think to buy. So where you've got the broadcast things, that kind of, you know, direct attribution does really start to break down. But what we start to do is we use it as a point of reference amongst other pieces of data. So one of the things that we did for TVC, for TV advertising, was we said, okay, right, well, this is how we're attributing it using that 5-minute attribution window. This is kind of the relative performance that it indicates. Let's look at it another way. And in the case of TVC, we actually took a baseline of pre-TVC. We said, right, what's the 4 weeks pre-TVC? What were the number of leads, the number of sales, and even website hits? Yep. And so we actually looked at that as a baseline and said, right, now that we've started to introduce TVC, what are the website hits? What are the leads? What are the sales? And so we could also see a lift there that we could kind of go back and go, right, well, what's the difference, the uplift, I guess, as a result of TVC? And given our spend, what we calculate as the uplift, that gives a separate indication of the effectiveness of TVC. You're not comparing apples and oranges, I suppose, with a direct attribution method versus the uplift kind of method, but they're just multiple data points in the arsenal to say if one's pointing, you know, it's good, and the other one's pointing good, then chances are it's working, continue investing. You know, if one's going one way and the other metric is kind of going the other way, then we've got to go, hold on, stop. We've got to kind of do some more data. And if we've got both metrics are pointing that, hey, look, this isn't performing as well as our other channels, then we know, hey, pull that back. And that's kind of the approach we've taken with a lot of our broadcast advertising as we've moved into TVC, radio, out of home, those kind of things. We've been using a kind of a combination of an attribution, but also kind of an uplift as best as we can determine, either from you know, market share or from leads or sales above a baseline to determine an uplift. And that's another kind of just metric that we use in conjunction with our other stuff to try and determine successfulness.
Yeah, right. And it's an imperfect approach.
100%.
Like, I think that
it's it.
I think, you know, so many organizations have been trying to figure out this attribution
part
of the marketing strategy. It's so hard.
Exactly. When I first started, I was like, surely somebody has solved this. But, you know, there's smarter people than me that have been working on this problem for so long. But, you know, certainly over the last kind of 4 years, it's very much been this is it's just an imperfect science. And that's, I guess, the key is you've got to do the best that you can. Neither, you know, there's no single methodology which is perfect, but using kind of a combination of them, you can get an indication of what's working and what's not. And I think you've always got to try, because something that is imperfect is still going to be far better than nothing at all. And I guess that's the biggest thing is if you rely on gut feel and gut feel alone, I guess that's only going to ever take you so far. You've really got to be able to go and pull together some data in order to be able to provide some kind of indication. And if that's not perfect all the time, absolutely, but it helps us give some feedback on the performance of the marketing. Otherwise, we're wandering blind.
Yeah, sure. No, it's such a challenge. I think it's going to become an even harder challenge for you now, because as you become that larger and larger company and like that household name, and I'm sure that like that, the word of mouth is increasing significantly, the brand's increasing significantly. Like, are you going to go to like that Telstra example of kind of the last click attribution? Like, is that what's going to be next? I mean, like, how are you thinking about what's going to happen next? Because it's not as simple as first click anymore, right?
No, absolutely. I think it'll be a long way. You know, Telstra's market share's around the 50% mark, and ours is around 3%. So we've got a long
We've got
way
a bit of growth
before we're going to be in that kind of scenario. It is something that we've been looking at, and I guess we've been kind of keeping an eye on our prompted brand awareness, but also our unprompted brand awareness. And that's been a kind of an interesting piece for us to start tracking and going, right, well, our prompted brand awareness has actually grown really significantly, but unprompted is still quite low. So unprompted is still around effectively equivalent to what our market share is, which is, not surprising, obviously, considering how long that Telstra's been in the market. When you're building a brand, you can't, in a lot of cases, build a brand overnight, and there's obviously certain success stories that everyone's aware of, where they just go, no one heard of Uber 5 years ago and now they're huge. But for most people, most marketers, I suppose, out there in the field, if you're not, those celebrities, I guess, of the advertising world, marketing is a long term, and it's a hard process to build a brand and to to kind of really get it in the mind of consumers. And so I view it very much as a long game. I don't think there'll be a point necessarily in the near future anyway that will be well known as a household name kind of thing.
Sure. Well, just on that point then, so what are some of the biggest marketing lessons that you've learned along the way? I'm sure there's been plenty.
Yes, there has been. It's been very interesting, and I think that part of the lessons that we've had as Aussie Broadband marketing, you can say that like marketing makes or breaks an organization. I don't really believe that that's true. The biggest lesson for me operating in this business has been actually that it's you are made or broken, I suppose, as a business by the quality of your product. It's kind of this whole adage of, you can polish a turd, I suppose. But honestly, and that's what it comes back to. And so we've been, I think, far more successful at growing our business compared to, say, for example, some other providers in the telco industry. And it's certainly not because, as much as we'd like to think that we're the best marketers and things like that, but that's absolutely not the case. It's on the strength of our product. We have such a hardworking team of network engineers and technology guys that are focused on the very, very best networking, the best systems to provide, the best NBN experience possible. And we've got incredible groups of customer service consultants that are focused on providing the very, very best customer service experience. And so from a marketing perspective, when you've got, an entire organization that's absolutely dedicated to delivering a high quality product, the marketing becomes easy, and it to a large degree markets itself. And that's one of the biggest things that we've actually used in our campaigns. We've got a campaign that we've been running now for the last few years called the Can't Beat Feedback campaign. And it literally is using feedback from our customers, real examples of things that they've either sent to us or posted on social media or things like that, that we've now used in our marketing campaign. And that's because of the strength of the product. That's really something that's what's driven the growth of the business. It hasn't necessarily been marketing, as much as every marketer would like to think that, that they're single-handedly responsible for the fortunes of their company. Really, product absolutely makes or breaks a business.
Yeah, for sure. And on that path, on that point there, where are we now? It's like the 3rd of July. We're still it seems like in the middle of a pandemic still. This whole thing started, and I think Aussie Broadband would have been just one of the companies where everyone was like, we need faster internet and we need it now, right? And so you would have received the benefit from that. But it's not as simple as everyone on the outside would think. It's like, it's like, say for example, like Zoom. Oh yeah, they must be so happy. It's so easy. Like, it's not that easy, is it? How did you kind of adapt to that increase, like in the demand for people actually just wanting a better internet service? Because I'm sure that would have been a huge challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's no business, I think, at all that obviously hasn't been affected by the COVID pandemic in some way, shape or form. certainly some businesses have grown as a result, and I guess we've been lucky to be in an industry that has kind of found people that needed internet all throughout the pandemic, and it's been more important. But you're absolutely right, that hasn't come without its challenges. We were in a position, and I suppose we were quite lucky, I guess, because a lot of telcos, particularly larger telco providers, actually operated overseas call centers that were completely taken offline. We were very lucky because we run an onshore call center operation that we were able to continue running. Australia wasn't affected nearly as badly as other countries. But what we did find is that, you're in a situation where people need their internet more than ever, but we also had to, and they expect, their internet to work, and they want to be able to call in and all that kind of stuff. But obviously, first and foremost, we've got to be thinking about this, the well-being, I suppose, and the health and safety of our staff. So we were in the process of shifting our call center, and a call center's, not like a standard operation where you've got a bunch of individuals, you go, cool, you guys work from home, that kind of thing. A call center is a very kind of different environment, but we were trying to shift our call center operations to a work from home environment, which was, completely new to a lot of our staff that we had in there, and operating in a work from home scenario, but also simultaneously trying to keep our offices open so we could continue to train new staff and bring new staff on board very, very rapidly to meet that influx of demand. And so, we actually recruited, it would have been over 100 staff in probably a 6-week period, just to help us to deal with the call volumes and kind of the inundation that came as a result from everybody needing to in a very short period of time have really, really good internet.
So was the biggest challenge just being able to handle the phone calls? Was the internet part kind of sorted, and it was more just like, how do you kind of handle support and sales and follow up and
pretty much.
Is that what it was?
Yeah, exactly. We find that there's a lot of certainly when customers are up and running, generally, if their internet's stable, there's no problem, then great, happy days. And a lot of customers, they don't, once they buy their provider, they choose their internet and choose their provider, most of the times it's smooth sailing. But it is, when they need to sign up, I guess, and potentially they need to change providers, and they need new routers and new hardware, and they need to be guided through the process. And so people need that extra support. Internet's not necessarily a simple just plug it in and away it goes in a lot of cases. And so, that was where we found that a lot of people, it was the customer service side of things, where people calling, and absolutely, we really pride ourselves on being able to provide that, the best in class kind of customer experience. It was just trying to get enough staff literally on the phones to deal with the influx of the calls that were coming in. And we actually had calls from customers of other providers saying, because they couldn't, other providers, the bigger companies, they completely shut their call centers. So no one could get through to a single person. And so we had other people, customers of other telcos, ringing us to say, hey, can you help me with my order? Can you help me with my internet? You know what I mean? I'm with another larger company, but I can't get through their support at theirs. And we were like, look, sorry, we'd love to help you. We really can't. So it was a really difficult time, I think, obviously for everybody, but just for us to be able to get enough, trying to transition our staff to work from home thing, but keep our offices open, keep on bringing on new staff to deal with that call volume. But we've got we're lucky enough to have some incredible people, I suppose, in the organization. And so, there were definitely some time, and there were points in time when the marketing team, even me, I was actually on the phones answering calls from customers just to be able to try and get through the backlog, because it was pretty much everyone stop everything. We need to focus on what's important. It's the product and the customer service. And we had marketing taking calls, service delivery calls, and myself taking service delivery calls to deal with it. But sometimes you've got to do what you've got to do yeah, that we've kind of found that, yeah, we're able to bring a lot of staff on board, and that really helped us kind of, ride that wave, I guess. And now things are far more back to normal, I guess.
And I can see how it's like one of those moments, right? It's like it's never going to happen again like that. And overnight, you've gone from, and this is just like a sample guess, right? From 500 calls per hour to 5,000 calls per hour or something like that, right? Like it just basically increases like at a factor of 10, like immediately, right? And then you're like, well, that is there now. That demand is there now. So either we can step up and we can fill it, or we can kind of hide back and just be kind of status quo. But how many hours a day were you working at that time? Because obviously that would have been like off the hook, like I can't even imagine.
Yeah, there was look, a lot of people, and it's many hands make light work, as with any kind of, whether it's a business or it's a community project or a not-for-profit, with anything, it was a case of many hands make light work. We were running a lot of overtime, and as I said, we were I had guys in marketing that were staying back and running overtime to answer phone calls and all things like that. But it was very much just a team effort, and I think that's one of the beauties, I guess. And when you've got a really strong culture in there, it wasn't, nobody thought twice about staying back to help out on queues or that kind of thing. It was very much this is the challenge, we've got to get this done, and ultimately we're committed to the best customer service. And so, sometimes you need to go above and beyond in order to make that happen. And everyone pulled together through a really difficult time. And it was really awesome to see.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. And I mean, I think I had wanted to transition to Aussie Broadband, and I just hadn't had like the reason, because I was basically with like the bigger provider before, and then contacted Telstra about, something, and they canceled my internet by accident. Like I was just trying to get something updated, like to move to NBN, and just canceled it. So I tried to call them and I couldn't call them. So then I basically, I called Aussie Broadband. I was up and running in like 6 hours, because it was the same modem. It was the same thing. They just connected it,
Mm-hmm.
And so that would have, like, that process seemed so easy for me, but I'm sure that would have been pretty challenging at that end, between the tech and the support and the follow-up. I think that they followed me up like 3 times or something, just for support. But it was really quick, right? And I think that was a big reason for your success in that period.
For sure.
Like I was like, my internet, you cut my internet. I'm like I run an internet company, like you can't cut my internet. Like it
absolutely.
It hurt. Yeah. And I'm pretty technical, and I couldn't sort it out either,
And that's the reality is people will probably, they'd rather go without a good deal of other things than go without internet. And that's kind of, as it shows, it's so important in keeping us connected, keeping us together. People are working from home, they're studying from home, kids learning from home. So, internet is critical, and when you need it to work. And as you said, there's nothing more frustrating than not being able to get through when you've got some kind of problem. And so that is one of the things that we've found, and we get quite a lot of feedback on the difference between other competitors and us is again, it just comes down to that product. And if you've got that product, the marketing becomes very easy.
Makes it way easier. Let's talk quickly about the team, because I just heard you mention that just a second ago, right? 4 or 5 years ago, it was a smaller kind of in-house team.
Team of one. Yep.
It was a team of one. Oh, so there was just you, was it? With 100,000 or whatever, and some of the founders or whatever, right? And the founder or whatever.
Yeah, when I started, I suppose, the company started, we've been going for probably 20 years ago, and it literally started in the lounge room with Phil Britt, our managing director, and John Reisinger, our CTO. And so we've grown from there. But certainly when I started in terms of marketing, and that was kind of nearly 4 years ago now, there was probably 65 people in the company in total, and the marketing team was just one, which was just me. And we've grown over the last kind of 3.5-4 years, from that 65 to now we've got, you know, over 450 staff members. So,
and in terms of the marketing team, because I know that's expanded over the time as well, how big is the marketing team, and kind of could you talk through quickly the first hires, second hires, and so on, kind of like how you built the team? Because I know there's a lot of companies out there that have agencies or not, and everyone knows actually having a full in-house team is probably going to be the best thing because they're all focused on you, but you don't just go and hire 20 people straight away. Right?
No,
So how did
absolutely.
you approach that? Yeah, that process.
Yeah. So when we started, and I guess you know, we kind of when I was brought in, I was kind of the remit was to become a national provider, to develop a national strategy, and that was something that, you know, as I was saying, we were just focused on regional Victoria, a little bit of South Australia. So there was some really kind of lofty goals, but you've always got to start small and work your way up. You know, you can't go out there, particularly for a small business, and straight away go, cool, I need all these people. So it was just started with me. Very quickly I said, oh, actually, hang on a second, guys, I think I need, you know, a couple of extra people. And so the team grew within the kind of the first 3 or 4 months, we grew to 4. And that was like, at the time, like, wow, 4 people dedicated to marketing. This is outrageous. This is crazy. But it was actually, I think, the start of, you know, you've got to build a really strong foundation. And the real benefit of having, you know, we were a very small team, but we worked really, really closely together. And when you've got a particularly, you know, something, I'm going to call it a small business again, it was quite small and it was quite dynamic. We were kind of changing things quite rapidly. And there was a point in time we had, you know, an agreement with another telco to actually sell services in areas that we weren't directly connected to. So we had our direct network in kind of 12 of 121, what they call POIs around Australia. But we actually needed another provider to service the remaining kind of, you know, 111 POIs or 110 POIs, because we weren't necessarily connected everywhere. And then pretty much it was actually kind of about 12 o'clock one day, the boss, Phil Britt, came down to our end of the building. He said, that's it. We're not selling any more Optus services. That's it. Stop selling them all. And we were like, oh my God, we've just sent 100,000 flyers to, you know, 100,000 flyers a week going out to all of these areas that were meant to be on, you know, effectively using that other provider. And like straight away, you know, and it's marketers' worst nightmare, because we've just invested in the beginnings of this mail out, and overnight it's just gone, boom, no, we're not selling any more of those services. So when you're faced with kind of positions like that and kind of crises, I guess, you know, because it was like oh my God, how the hell are we gonna fix this now? We spent all this money and we've invested all this, and now we can't effectively sell any of these services. It really helps to have a really tight-knit team that you can rely on. You've got to be able to rely on the people sitting next to you. And you know, I was very, very lucky to have awesome those couple first hires, and James Sampson in my team, and Alex Kovacs. You know, we kind of, you know, live together, breathe together, working kind of side by side. And you know, as soon as something like that happened, right, guys, what are we going to do? How are we going to change things straight away? And just, yeah, having the right people around you is just so critical. And I was super lucky in those early days. And they weren't, you know, I guess some people are like, oh, you've got to kind of, you know, you've got to look for people for experience. You know, you've got to get people in there that know what they're doing, so straight away they can get off the ground and running. Our experience hasn't really been like that. Our whole philosophy at Aussie Broadband has been hire for attitude, hire for, you know, intelligence and skill. We can teach the experience, the things you need to know. And that was kind of the thing, you know, no one really came into the team having been a telco marketer, having, you know, had all this experience, blah, blah, blah. And I think that's one of the things that really kind of actually helped us, because although it was a lot harder for us, we didn't have any preconceived ideas around what worked, what didn't work. and so that meant that we had to test everything. We had no other option. So everything had to get tested, everything had to get optimized. And that kind of whole process grew from having a team that, they had the kind of the passion and the skill set, but not necessarily the experience. And sometimes that actually, in our case, actually really helped us in those early days.
And so you hired for the more, I guess, like general role, is that right? Like it was more,
pretty much
like marketing specialist. Like it didn't say what kind of marketing is going to do. That's like you're in marketing is your specialty. Done.
And that's right. And in those early days, because you're running a small team, everyone's doing everything, and there were, we'd go, right, okay, you're going to do this, you're going to do this. We were all really close together, and so communication wasn't a problem. Certainly, as we started to grow and expand, people started to develop into more kind of specialist, residential, and focusing on residential customers and business customers and those kind of things. So that kind of came over time. And certainly now we've got a team of, I think, in total, the marketing team, I think, is about 16 people or so. And so now we've kind of got more specialist roles, but certainly in those early days, everyone did everything. And still, it's not, it's not unknown for us to kind of go, okay, hey, look, this isn't working, so let's actually change this. You used to be doing this, well, now let's do this, and let's treat this way. And being flexible and to continually adapt and change as the circumstances require. And in 12 months time, we might have a different team structure again. Who knows? And
have you got like 10 more minutes? Because I got a couple more questions. Or like, is it a hard stop at 11? Is it a hard stop?
I got a hard stop at 11, so you'll have to.
Oh, go! Wow! When do you choose to hire somebody else, for the in-house team? Like at what point, like does it go from 16 to 17 or from 12 to 13?
That's a really tough question. It's not, for us, it's very much around the targets and where we need to be. So I guess probably a more typical approach is, you wait till the workload and whatever else like that, and then you go, right, we've got to add someone. If you do that though, I tend to find that you probably will miss opportunities that otherwise you would have been able to take an advantage of if you have capacity. Now, you obviously don't want to have people that are sitting there doing nothing. You know what I mean? There's got to be, at the end of the day, I've got a budget I've still got to work towards as does everyone who's hiring staff. But certainly, when I kind of initially, started and did that first hire, I kind of wanted to hire one, and then I ended up with three. I went, right, well, I need one right now, but where the business is going and our kind of goals, what we need to get to, one is going to be enough for the growth that we have now, but it's not going to achieve that kind of step change in the marketing that we needed to achieve at the time in order to hit the goals of the organization. And so that's actually when we went, well, I hired two and kind of reappropriated one from another area that kind of made the three up, I guess. And that was kind of the thing. And so as we've kind of grown, it's been, well, we need somebody to possibly do this, and it would be good to have it in-house, but it's more with an eye on the future. And hey, look, in order to get to that breakthrough goal, what are the things that we need to start doing now? Because if you wait till that point that justifies having a full-time person, say, for example, take a role like the website, right? And in our case, our website is the overwhelming majority of our lead generation. And probably, well, about 50% of our sales run through online. And when you're smaller, it's kind of like, we can't have somebody that's dedicated full-time to the website. But when you look at actually how important is the website to our overall operations, and how important is it going to be? Because if people can sign up online, it's a real easy experience. Good for the customer, obviously, they can connect really easily, but also good for the business. And so you go, right, well, if in 6 months' time we need, a full-powered website, and that website's going to be, pushing through 5,000 sales on its own and responsible for probably the generation of 20,000 leads, well, invest in a website person now, because that's what's going to allow that growth to occur for that point that you need to be in 6 months or 12 months time, or whatever that is.
Got it. One final question. What's next for Aussie Broadband? What's next? Like, you've come so far. Next? You've gone from 25 to 50 to 100 to 190 million. What's next?
So we're looking to continue our growth, I suppose. One of the things is that, we're out to change the game, I guess. And what we've seen so far in telco is people are so used to they're used to waiting on hold. They're used to a shitty experience. Everyone hates having to call their telco and that kind of thing. And where we're at, and we go, the industry shouldn't be like that. People shouldn't have to put up with that kind of experience. And so we're really out there to change the game. We think that, there's a real market for what we kind of offer. And we're looking to continue growing, and hopefully having a lot more customers that are happy with their ambient experience and happy with their telco. And we're looking at basically a listing later on in the year, listing on the stock exchange. That'll help us to continue to grow, invest in our people, invest in our systems and our product and things like that. And, hopefully, we will be a much bigger company in the next couple of years.
And obviously your role has continually changed from all that time 4 years ago to what it's going to be when it's a publicly listed company. So that was a question I was going to ask, but let's leave it there for today. Thanks so much for coming on the podcast today and sharing the story of Aussie Broadband. It's been a fun chat. Thanks, Kusi.
No worries. Thanks, Alex. It's been been great to chat with you.
Thanks for listening to the Growth Manifesto podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please head on over to iTunes and give us a 5-star rating. For more episodes, please visit growthmanifesto.com/podcast.